Okay, everyone. Thank you for joining me today, and we're going to start sort of a beginner's introduction of the Gospel of Mark, and we'll look at, I hope that this is really a blessing for you and that this helps your understanding when you're reading this book and even following along through our read-through of the Gospel of Mark. If you haven't seen those videos yet, I'll have a link to those in the section below, and I'll also have them on the page here. So first I want to say what exactly we will be going over. First, as I mentioned before, we'll say who wrote that book. Secondly, we'll go over Mark, who is believed to have wrote the book of Mark. Third, we'll talk about when that book was wrote and a little bit of the debates thereof. And fourthly, we'll mention who that book was wrote for or to. Also, I want you to know that this is a little bit of an academic study. There may be differences in opinion and understanding with you or your denomination, but I will let you know that at the very end, I will have the sources that I've got this information from, so I hope you check those out and that they're a blessing for you. So first, we'll move into who wrote the book. And it seems pretty obvious because this book is called the Book of Mark, or the Gospel of Mark, or the Gospel of St. Mark. However, technically, this book is anonymous because there's no direct claim to authorship within the book. If you look all through it, it doesn't tell exactly who wrote that book. However, other scripture and other found evidence suggests that John Mark, otherwise known as Mark, was the author of that book. And in fact, this has led to over time and in many early manuscripts that this book was referred to as the Gospel according to Mark, or according to St. Mark. So there's a lot to believe there, and even so much as it's widely believed that Mark wrote this Gospel directly from the testimony of Peter, who we know was one of the apostles of Jesus and would have witnessed much of this happening firsthand. Okay, so next we'll look a little bit into Mark. Again, we're not going to move super deep into this, but we know that Mark was the cousin of Barnabas. Also, we know that in Acts 12:12 it tells us that Mark was the son of Mary, who was a woman who provided a meeting place for early Christians, and of course you can read more about that in Acts chapter 12, verse 12. And we even get to know a little bit later on that Mark was a very close affiliate and sort of a student of Peter, and Peter even refers to Mark as sort of a spiritual son, and you can read about that more in 1 Peter chapter 5:13. So again, we see that Mark and Peter's relationship was very close, calling him a son, in fact, and obviously their ministries were very much aligned with one another. Next, we'll move on into when the book was written. Of course, this is an area that's very arguable today, and so I've sort of given reference to two arguments. One is that it was wrote somewhere between AD 64 and 69, and again, there's the source there, so I would encourage you to take a look at that. And it's also debatable that this happened sometime in late AD 59, and again, there's the source, so I would encourage you to look at that and sort of form that opinion for yourself. But what we can assume, if we're assuming, firstly, that Mark wrote this gospel, and secondly, that it came from the testimony of Peter, it's very safe to assume that Mark would have wrote this gospel before Peter's martyrdom in Rome. So we at least know it was before that time if you're making those assumptions. Moving on, we'll look at who this book was wrote to and for. It's widely believed that this book was wrote in Rome. Obviously, Mark followed Peter to Rome, and this is probably when he wrote that book, again making some of the assumptions that we've made earlier. And it was wrote largely to the Roman Gentile Christians, not so much the Jewish Christians that we see in the Holy Land. And this would have been, honestly, quite the godsend, quite the needed encouragement for those Christians in Rome, because what handful of them there were, or maybe even more of a handful, these Christians were widely and heavily persecuted by, well, all of Rome. And we see this even ultimately by several of the apostles' martyrdom, and ultimately related to this, Peter's martyrdom as well. So now we've discussed a little bit about these things. I hope this has answered a few questions for you, and I hope that it's been a blessing for you. Again, the sources are here, so I would encourage you to give those a look, and even if you have, say, a study Bible, that you would read the introductory portions of that study Bible, and that helps you understand where the Gospel of Mark is coming from, and who wrote it, and to whom it's for. That way you can sort of deeper understand what it is God is trying to communicate to us through this gospel. Once again, I want to thank you for joining us. Please be sure to like, share, favorite, and subscribe. And check out the Gospels, which again, I will have linked below. Thank you for joining me, and have a blessed day.